Hey folks, Ray from DCRainmaker.com here. Today we've got GoPro's newest action camera, the GoPro Hero6 Black. Now this action camera builds upon the Hero 5 Black introduced a year ago, and does that in two ways. One, it's got a whole bunch of new features, and two, it's got a much higher price tag, $100 more now. So this is at $499. The Hero 5 Black is sticking around at $399. Then we've got the Hero 5 Session, that's a little cube-like camera, at $299. And then finally, the Hero Session is their lower end one at $149. So all those cameras, that's their current lineup going forward. Now with the Hero6 Black, you're probably going to hear a lot of buzzwords, a lot of things about it, things like 4K 60, for example, so 60 frames per second, and that's super, super cool. You're also probably going to hear a lot about GoPro's new chip, also kind of cool, but I want to talk about all these other features that probably aren't hitting the mainstream press for the most part, and now that I've used it for the couple weeks, I can kind of talk about what things work really well and what things don't necessarily work really well. So what we're going to do is run through all these features, and the very first one we're going to start off with is actually 4K 60. So 4K 60 refers to 4K resolution at 60 frames per second. Previously with the Hero 5 Black, they were limited to 4K 30 frames per second, which meant that you couldn't quite get some of the action shots you wanted to in 60 frames per second and slow that down afterwards. And that really is the advantage of 60 frames per second. It's the ability to take a shot that's maybe fast moving, like mountain biking or skiing, and to slow that down. And of course, as you increase more frame rates, you have more options in post-production. So this gives you a lot more options. You're seeing some of this right now on the screen, stuff that's shot at 4K 60 that have gone ahead and slowed back down again to 30 frames per second or even slower than that. And also if you're talking like post-production software with Premiere or Final Cut Pro, if you do blending, you can even get more out of it. So it gives you a lot more flexibility. There are some limitations though. Number one is in 4K 60, you cannot do linear mode. So it's only wide only. So linear mode refers to things like the trees right here are all perfectly straight because I'm shooting on a traditional camera, whereas GoPro has that little bit of that fisheye look to it. Linear gets rid of the fisheye and keeps it nice and clean, with the exception of really close-up stuff, in which case that fisheye usually looks cooler. So number two is improvements in image stabilization. So now they allow you to image stabilize up to 4K 30. In the past, that was limited to 2.7K. So image stabilization is in box. It is not, unfortunately, optical image stabilization like you would see on the Sony cameras. Instead, it is still software-based. There's a little bit they've said they've done from a hardware standpoint, but they said it's like almost negligible. So it's mostly software-based. Now to kind of compare to this a little bit, I've taken this camera and 4 other cameras and put them on a test run, on a mountain bike run, basically repeating the same thing over and over again. So I've got the Hero 6 Black versus the Hero 5 Black versus the Sony action camera with image stabilization, the Yi 4K Plus, and the Garmin Verb Ultra 30. So check out that video up in the corner there. It's really just straightforward, allows you to kind of see both the resolution, the quality, as well as the image stabilization of each one. Next up on the list, we have 1080p 240. So what that means is we can now shoot at 240 frames per second at 1080p resolution. So that's almost doubling, or that is doubling what they had in the past. This is huge for folks that are doing sports that are super fast moving, where you want to really slow things down in post-production. So think about stuff like jumping off a ski jump and then just having the whole thing just look absolutely beautiful mid-jump. Same with like mountain bike trips and stuff like that. Or it could be something more simple, like dropping a water balloon. And so in this case, you can see as the water balloon drops, it just looks really, really, really nice. And if you compare to that before, where we could only do 240 frames per second at 720p, the quality, the resolution is astounding there. Now the next item we got on the list is the new GP1 chipset. Now this is something you're certainly going to see a lot of discussion on in the mainstream media, but let's talk about what that actually means. So the GP1 chipset is the image processing chipset. In the past, for basically forever, GoPro has used Amarella chipsets, and it's what most other companies use as well. So for example, Garmin uses Amarella in their action cameras. That meant that for the most part, you could take a Hero 5 Black and a Garmin Verb Ultra 30, and the image quality and the image sensing capabilities were identical because they were using, in most cases, identical chips behind the scenes. GoPro felt that wasn't so competitive anymore, and so they wanted to make their own chipset now called the GP1. Now I have a lot of concerns about that up front because in general, when companies do stuff like that, it's usually for cost saving purposes, and that usually means it's going to be crappier despite how much marketing fluff they put around it. But in this case, they really nailed it. And the chipset is absolutely astounding from the quality that you see, and you'll see throughout this entire video. It's really, really, really solid. So I'm really glad that actually worked out for them, something I was kind of concerned about. And that they've said has given a lot more flexibility, both for their current product platform, so new features, as well as giving them more flexibility down the road. So far so good. I haven't seen really any issues that come out of it in all the different scenarios that I've been testing thus far. Next, we got a biggie, which is better low light performance. Now this is something that you really, a lot of camera companies always talk about better low light performance. Like if you read any camera PR press release out there, they're going to say better low light performance. But they're like legit this time. Like just to put these two side by side here, this is a GoPro Hero 5 Black compared to the GoPro Hero 6 Black, filming out here in the wilderness, side by side on these two cameras for a simple time lapse. It's incredible the difference that you see there. Another example here is on the Las Vegas Strip. Again, just sitting there, it looks spectacular. Another example here, driving down the Las Vegas Strip. Look at it, I mean, there's no gimbal or anything here. It's just simply on the front of the car. Super clear colors, despite the fact that it's at night. Really, really good stuff. If I were to pick two features that are actually kind of my favorites out of this entire thing, number one is this low light performance, but number two is the next one, which is better dynamic range. And so what that means is that the pictures look clearer, they look better, they look more contrast from the colors and done natively. A perfect example of that is this photo I took last week out in the desert. This is basically sunny day with a couple clouds out there, but it's a desert. Most GoPro action camera pictures in the desert kind of have that really flat look to them. They're not like a lot of vibrance. This picture is completely unedited out of the camera, not even using the new HDR mode either, by the way, just straight up as is. And you see the same thing in video as well. Just the range and the quality of the colors is so much better. The same goes for how fast it processes light changes. So if you look in the case of my comparison video there, where you see the mountain bike going from darks to lights, so basically going from the shade in the trees out to the sun, it just adjusts so much faster than the Hero 5 Black did, and that makes for a better video. You don't have that washed out look to it or the underexposed look to it. Next, we have more changes in image stabilization. In the past, you had 3 axes to work with, but only 2 of them worked in all the modes, in particular in wide mode. So if you were shooting in wide, you didn't have all axes, and so if you did like a walking across a crowd or something like that, you would still see the bumps as you went like this, versus now you can walk across something like that just simply holding the camera, and it's going to cancel that out, and it looks really, really astounding. Much, much cleaner than it would have in the past. And again, this is coming in part from GoPro's new GP1 chip, and also as well some new algorithms they have on the side of that. The next feature we got is a new zoom menu. Now, in the past on GoPro's action cameras, you would zoom by choosing different modes. You go from like wide to linear, linear to narrow, or narrow to medium, and so on. And that was essentially cropping the image. And you had to like basically pick one of those things depending on what you were trying to do. Now, of course, it's still using the same wide sensor. It was just simply cropping things down. Now you actually have a nifty little slider. It's like, like cell phone age of a phone where you just simply go swipe left and right to be able to zoom into the image and record at that rate or take a picture at that particular crop. It's really cool stuff. There are a couple limitations to be aware of though with that feature. Number one is it does not work in 4K 60 frames per second. It also does not work in 1080p to 40 frames per second, as well as a few of the 4x3 modes are not compatible with that either. Next, we got a new photo mode, which is the HDR photo capture. Now you may be wondering, how is it different from what we had last year with the Hero 5 Black in WDR? Now WDR basically went ahead and gave you more dynamic range within a single image, whereas HDR is taking multiple images, compressing them together to make things pop a bit more. Now, of course, some people don't like the HDR look. It can look fake in a lot of cases, but it's certainly an option you have now. You can take it, you can see if it works for you for that particular scene. You can also dial it back a bit later on, which is what I'm finding is actually more useful, is to shoot something in HDR, and then on my phone or whatever else I'm using to edit the photo later on, I can just kind of pull some of the saturation back a little bit, and it doesn't have that fake look, but it still exposes things a lot better, especially some of the dark and the shadows, as well as things that are overexposed. It kind of pulls it all together a little bit easier than me trying to fix a under and overexposed image in post. Going back to some hardware changes, we've got a dual Wi-Fi chip inside the new Hero 6 Black. So both 2.4 as well as 5 gigahertz, and that's really going to help you out in the download speed. So what they're going to do is they're going to kick up to 5 gigahertz in cases where it needs to download larger files. They say that's going to go more than double the speed of downloads from your camera to your phone, as well as upwards into the cloud via Wi-Fi if you're connected to a Wi-Fi network. And indeed, it seems pretty quick. I've been downloading some big files back and forth, and things are definitely very solid. Speaking of files, we got our next change here, which is the change to H.265 HEVC files. Now you may be saying, what the heck are those? Those are super high efficiency files. In fact, iOS changed to those file types this past year for new photos taken on the device, and iOS 11 supports them natively. And what that means is that you're basically taking about half the file size that you would have in the past for the same image quality and resolution. Now, not all files are recorded like that on the GoPro Hero 6 Black. Only the higher end files, so things like 4K 60 and 1080p to 40. Now, there's some pros and cons there though. On one side, you have a lot smaller files. On the other side, you minimize the amount of things that can deal with that file and open that file. For example, like if I record a 4K 60 video, I can't actually preview that from my phone streaming back in the camera. I have to transfer the whole thing first from the camera to my phone, and then the phone can play it back. Also, you're limited on other applications that may support that file type, so definitely validate that you can support that across the board in your editing suite. Next, we've got new voice commands for the Hero 6 Black, in particular one that allows you to turn the camera on when it's already off. Now, it's only going to work when it's been off or turned on at some point in the last 8 hours, and this basically builds upon the features we saw last year, where GoPro will keep the Bluetooth smart connection on here live for 8 hours after you turn it off. That allows you to connect to it from your phone, and then from there it'll turn on Wi-Fi, and you can connect to it and download photos and stuff like that and videos. The same technology is being leveraged now to go ahead and allow you to kickstart the unit and start voice control from it, so you can start recording immediately. But it's not perfect, and you'll see that especially, you know, if you're mountain biking or riding fast where there's wind noise or skiing or anything that's moving very quickly, the voice control is a bit of hit or miss. Still, it's handy if you want to set something up and just yell at the camera and you're in relatively close range. It mostly works. Our next one on the list isn't so much a new item as it is just a really important item, which is the fact that the Hero 6 Black maintains the exact same shell as the Hero 5 Black. In fact, you can't even tell someone's using a Hero 6 Black unless you look at the small writing on the very side in this tiny little font that says 6 instead of 5, which has been great the last couple weeks. I've been able to use this thing everywhere right in front of people, and they have no idea I'm using a Hero 6 Black. So that's also great though for things like accessories. So for example, this works in the Karma drone, in the Karma grip, and all these third-party accessories that you may already have, just straight up, nothing new. You don't need to buy any new accessories or anything like that. Next up on the list is improvements to what they're doing on the camera and how that transfers to QUIK. So within the camera now, they're actually recognizing faces. Now they're not at this moment showing you that on the back of the screen or anything like that yet, but what's happening behind the scenes is the camera is actually analyzing that in the videos as you take them, and it's passed that information on to GoPro QUIK, which is their software, and the software then is able to do a better job identifying things like faces and action moments using the accelerometer and the GPS data that are built into here, just as it came through with the Hero 5 Black, and that in turn gives you, in theory, better edits in GoPro QUIK, which is their application that can do automatic edits and stuff like that from your computer. And it seems to be better. Like, I'm not going to say it's great. I mean, GoPro QUIK has made a lot of strides in the last year, but it can still be somewhat frustrating at times. There are some limitations there though, which gets us to our very last item. The things that don't quite yet work very well. So first off, QUIK is generally good, but it, for example, it can't pull in the 4K 60 videos, nor can it pull in the 1080p 240 videos. So it doesn't do that automatically anyways. You have to manually pull that stuff in after the fact, which can take a lot more time, versus normally if I have my camera on and my phone on, it just magically pulls the stuff over and life is great. The automated stuff doesn't work there very well, so that's a bit of a bummer. On top of that, you still can't name cameras in QUIK, so as you might expect to have a bunch of GoPro action cameras, and the new Hero 5 and Hero 6 cameras can't be named. You can't be like raise GoPro 1, raise GoPro 2, and so on. They have these really long strings that are just sort of messy of a bunch of cameras. GoPro used to allow this years ago, and then they got rid of it last year for reasons that make no sense whatsoever. On top of that, you still have the stupid little port here that closes and waterproofs this whole thing, because this camera is of course waterproof to 10 meters or 33 feet. And that port door like is engineering wise great, but I'm still upset with GoPro for charging 20 bucks for an accessory port. That's like 70 cents of plastic. And given how easy it is to lose them since you have to take them off to put in the Karma grip for the drone or for the gimbal, it would be nice if that thing was like maybe 5 bucks, or hey, just even like $9.99 would be more reasonable than 20 bucks for a 70-cent piece of plastic. Still, overall, I am blown away by this camera. It is without question my favorite GoPro action camera of all time, and really probably my favorite action camera in general. In the past, I've used sort of a combination of the GoPro Hero 5 Black along with the Garmin Verb Ultra 30, depending on what I was doing, for a lot more sport-focused things where I had like data metrics like cycling, where I want to overlay stuff. I would use the Garmin action camera because I can go ahead and overlay that data onto it. But these days, I'll probably mostly use this instead because the quality is so much better. I really do prefer the data overlay portion of the Garmin side, but from a quality standpoint, you can't beat this. I mean, it's just so good. The dynamic range is just definitely one of my favorites, as is the low light conditions. And again, the ability to shoot 4K 60 is pretty handy, especially for slowing things down after the fact. With that, don't forget to check out the full in-depth review in the bottom of the description there. Again, I've got way more sample footage and sample photos and details and more than you can ever imagine in that review. Also, don't forget to hit the subscribe button as well as the like button. I really appreciate it. And you'll see a bunch of videos pop up in a second that are GoPro Hero 6 specific videos that you don't want to miss either. Have a good one.